Welcome to a Legendarium special about the strange death of Napoleon Bonaparte. In the comments section, let me know how you think Napoleon Bonaparte met his end. Napoleon said that history is a fable that everyone has agreed upon, yet few agreed about the fallen emperor's death. Napoleon unleashed revolutionary changes and achieved a godlike reputation while in power. Yet he also ruled as a despot and warmonger who caused the deaths of 4 million people from Moscow to Manchester. After the French emperor's final defeat at Waterloo, he surrendered to the British. Rather than execute him and turn him into a martyr, the British placed him on one of the most isolated places on Earth, the British-ruled island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. A tiny island measuring only 10 by 5 miles, its jagged cliffs must have seemed a grim sight when the fallen emperor first laid eyes upon it. After enjoying 2 pleasant months at the home of an old friend named William Ballacombe, the British moved Napoleon to Longwood House. The property had fallen into disrepair, becoming damp and riddled with mold. There Napoleon lived, out of power and exiled from his beloved France. The island became infested with rats, which satirists across Europe used as a chance to poke fun at the former emperor. A German cartoon depicted a battalion of rats serving Napoleon instead of courtiers. A French royalist cartoon showed the former emperor sleeping in an army tent while the rats plot revolution, with a caption reading, "Not even the rats want him." The British governor, Hudson Lowe, feared Napoleon would escape, so he restricted his movement, watched his correspondence, and ordered that Napoleon be seen by his officers several times a day. This led to the ex-emperor launching a bizarre revolution of his own, closing the shutters of his house and carving tiny peepholes into them so he could look out without being seen. He designed sunken pathways in the garden to make it harder for his guards to spot him. Despite Lowe's orders that no mention be made of Napoleon's imperial status, the former emperor kept up imperial protocol with men in military dress and women dressed in gowns. He also took up pastimes. Napoleon dictated his memoirs, wrote a book on Julius Caesar, studied English, and played cards. In fact, several versions of solitaire, like a card game known as Patience, have been named after him. During early 1821, he began growing sickly, suffering from abdominal pain, weakness, and constipation. His last weeks in April became plagued by vomiting, incessant hiccups, and blood clots in various parts of his body. As the end neared, Napoleon asked his servants to dress him in a field marshal's uniform, complete with boots and spurs. They then placed him on a military camp bed, and he breathed his last on May 5, 1821. His attendants hoped to move his remains to Paris. Instead, when they opened his will, they found that Napoleon requested to be buried in St. Helena, in a beautiful valley located near his home that he had fallen in love with. The physicians who carried out Napoleon's autopsy on May 6, 1821, concluded that his death came from stomach cancer. They also judged it had been worsened by bleeding gastric ulcers. This bleeding happened after he took a huge dose of calomel, a compound containing mercury often used as a medicine the day before he died. During the autopsy, the doctors removed his heart and intestines and placed them into sealed vessels, the standard treatment for monarchs' remains at the time. For reasons unknown, an Italian physician also cut off Napoleon's male organ. His chaplain smuggled the male organ out of the island, and it ended up being bought and sold several times over the years by various parties. It finally wound up on display in 1927 at New York City's Museum of French Art. Time magazine compared it to a maltreated strip of buckskin shoelace, an inglorious end for one who conquered more than half of Europe. The remainder of his remains eventually received more dignified treatment. In 1840, the French government brought Napoleon's remains home on the orders of King Louis Philippe. By 1861, his nephew, Emperor Napoleon III, gave his uncle a truly imperial tomb. Napoleon now rests in a set of 5 coffins within a towering mausoleum that allows visitors to gaze down upon him, including Adolf Hitler, who paid a visit to Paris after he conquered it in 1940. Yet that did not settle just how Napoleon died. In 1961, a Swedish dentist named Sten Forfeld made international headlines. Using the latest technology to analyze a lock of the emperor's hair, he and his team announced that Napoleon might have died from arsenic poisoning. Their second paper analyzed a different hair supposedly pulled from Napoleon's scalp. Again, they found high levels of arsenic and suggested he had been exposed to the poison for months before his death. Of course, it is impossible to determine for certain if the 2 hairs even came from the imperial scalp. Decades later, chemists John Savory and J. Thomas Hindmarch wrote a rebuttal. The two reminded their readers that in the bad old days of medicine, bleeding, cupping, and arsenic treatments remained common remedies for a host of illnesses. Chemists also used arsenic in rodenticides, insecticides, clothing dyes, and even candy wrappers. French aristocrats, including Napoleon, wore arsenic face and hair powder. Despite the fact that the arsenic could have found its way into Napoleon's hair this way, history buffs and journalists have embraced a conspiracy theory that Napoleon died from arsenic poisoning. They have also identified men who might have given the fallen emperor his final medicine. One obvious suspect is Governor Lau, who likely wished to see Napoleon die before he could make another escape attempt. Others point to Charles Tristan, the Marquis de Montholon, Napoleon's close friend on the island. Since Bonaparte left Montholon 2 million francs in his will, the Marquis had a motive. Again, there is no way to know this for certain, and given how often people used arsenic in Napoleon's day, and the Bonaparte family's history of gastric issues, it is possible that Napoleon Bonaparte died of natural causes, even if his doctors helped to push him in the grave with their horrible medicine. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.